Hello and welcome. My name is Alan and we are back with more Bhagavad Gita. We'll be continuing reading the introduction since so much of it is the book. But yeah. Anyway, let's go ahead and hop into this. Yoga psychology. In trying to describe their discoveries, the Upanishadic seers developed a specialized vocabulary. Their terms were later elaborated by mystics who were also brilliant philosophers. Kapila, Shankara, and others, the ancient Indian counterparts of authorities like Augustine and Aquinas in the West. The most useful part of this vocabulary comes from Sankhya, the philosophical system whose practical counterpart is the school of meditation called yoga. Both are traditionally traced to one towering authority, Kapila, who and have much in common with Buddhist philosophy. An ancient saying celebrates their practicality. There is no theory like Sankhya, no practice like yoga. The Gita does not belong to the Sankhya school or to any other, as it is comprehensive as the Upanishads. But Sankhya provides a precise vocabulary for describing the workings of the mind, and the Gita draws on that vocabulary freely. Sankhya philosophy posits two separate categories: Purusha, spirit, and Prakriti, everything else. This is not the Western mind-matter distinction. Prakriti is the field of what can be known objectively, the field of phenomena, the world of whatever has name and form, and that is not only of matter and energy, but also of the mind. As physics postulates a unified field from which all phenomena can be derived, Sankhya describes a field that includes mental phenomena as well. Mind, energy, and matter all belong to a field of forces. Purusha, pure spirit, is the knower of this field of phenomena and belongs to a wholly different order of reality. Only Purusha is conscious, or rather, Purusha is consciousness itself. What we call mind is only an internal instrument that Purusha uses, just as the body is its external instrument. For practical purposes, at least as far as the Gita is concerned, Purusha may be considered as a synonym for Atman. Purusha is the self, beyond all change, the same in every creature. Matter and mind. Perhaps I should confess at this point that the paragraphs that follow in this short section are somewhat technical and not necessary for understanding the Gita. They can be skipped by anyone who finds them dry. I include them simply because Sankhya's explanation of mind and matter, when properly understood, makes sense of many subjects in the Gita that might otherwise seem arbitrary. Maya, the survival of personality after death, the way karma works through the mind. It accommodates modern physics perfectly and offers promising explanations of mind-body relationships in health and disease. However, Sankhya's way of looking at the mind is very different from our usual physical orientation and therefore impossible to absorb without reflection. Sankhya's hallmark is a list. Sankhya meaning counting or listing of 24 principles or tattvas, suchnesses, which trace the steps by which unitary primordial Pankriti becomes manifested as the countless forms of mind, matter, and energy that make up the world we live in. The tattvas are listed in the Gita. The field Arjuna is made up of the following: the 5 areas of sense perception, the 5 elements, the 5 sense organs, and the 5 organs of action, the 3 components of the mind, manas, buddhi, and ahamkara, and the undifferentiated energy, prakriti, from which all these evolved. I know of no English words to use for these 24 constituents. Manas corresponds roughly to mind in the way that word is commonly used. Buddhi is the discriminative faculty, the discriminating intellect. Ahamkara, literally I maker, is the sense of ego. I have used such rough labels in the translation which follows, but really they are technical terms with precise definitions, each associated with a specific function and level of consciousness. Approximations are misleading because they bring in associations from Western philosophy, which has a wholly different orientation. Behind all these categories lies a powerful practical assumption. Sankhya is not trying to describe physical reality. It is analyzing consciousness, knowledge, for the sole purpose of unraveling the human being's true identity. So it does not begin with the material universe as something different and separate from the mind that perceives it. It does not talk about sense objects outside us and senses within, and then try to get the two together. It begins with one world of experience. Sense objects and senses are not separate. They are 2 aspects of the same event. Mind, energy, and matter are a continuum, and the universe is not described as it might be in itself, but as it presents itself in the human mind. As they say in the new physics, it is not just an observable universe, but a participatory universe. Let me illustrate. This morning I had a fresh mango for breakfast. A large, beautiful, fragrant one, which had been allowed to ripen until just the right moment when the skin was luminous with reds and oranges. You can see from that kind of description that I like mangoes. I must have eaten thousands of them when I was growing up, and I probably know most varieties intimately by their color, shape, flavor, fragrance, and feel. Sankhya would say that this mango I appreciated so much does not exist in the world outside, at least not with the qualities I ascribe to it. The mango in itself, for example, is not red and orange. These are categories of a nervous system that can deal only with a narrow range of radiant energy. My dog Bogart would not see a luscious red and orange mango. He would see some gray mass with no distinguishing features, much less interesting to him than a piece of buttered toast. But my mind takes in messages from five senses and fits them into a precise mango form in consciousness. And that form, nothing outside, is what I experience. Not that there is no real mango, but what I experience. The object of my sense perception and my knowing are in consciousness, nowhere else. A brilliant neuroscientist I was reading recently says something similar in a contemporary language. We never really encounter the world. All we experience is our own nervous system. When the Gita says that the material world is made up of five material elements, then it is talking about the world as we perceive it through our five senses. The object of this world are in the mind, not outside. Physical objects in this sense require a mental component. Also, five essences or mental conditions of perception, each corresponding to one of the five senses. From these five tanmatras derive, on the one hand, the five sense organs, and on the other hand, the five material elements. You can see that the number 5 and the correspondences of Sankhya are not arbitrary, but reflect the ways we have of sorting electrical information supplied to the brain. 4 of these elements have names similar to those from the ancient philosophy in the West: earth, air, fire, and water. But if we remember that we are talking about principles of perception rather than earth stuff, fire stuff, and so on, it should become clear that this is not an antiquated theory left behind by the progress of physical science. It is quite sophisticated and accommodates contemporary physical thought rather well, for it recognizes that the act of knowledge and mind conditions what is known. Senses and sense objects, then, are very intimately related. There is a causal connection, for example, between the things we see and the physical organ of seeing, the eye, as its related branches of the nervous system, both dependent on the underlying form in the mind that conditions how we perceive light. The objects we see are shaped by the way we see, so senses and sense objects make sense only together. Each is incomplete without the other, and that is why there is such a strong pull between senses and sense objects. On the other hand, the Gita says this pull has nothing to do with us, the self, the knower. When Krishna keeps telling Arjuna to train his mind to be alike in pleasure and pain, he is simply being practical. To discover unity, consciousness has to be withdrawn from the hold of the senses, which ties it to duality. When the senses contact sense objects, a person experiences cold or heat, pleasure or pain. These experiences are fleeting. They come and go. Bear them patiently, Arjuna. Those who are not affected by these changes, who are the same in pleasure and pain, are truly wise and fit for immortality. The sensory attraction of pleasure is just an interaction between inert elements of similar stuff, very much like a magnetic pull between two objects. We are not involved when I look, we are not involved. When I look at a fresh, ripe mango, it is natural for my senses to respond. That is their nature. But I should be able to stand aside and watch this interaction with detachment. The way people stand and watch while movers unload a van. In that way, I can enjoy what my senses report without ever having to act compulsively on their likes and dislikes. Sankhya's explanation of mind and body has profound implications for psychosomatic medicine. In a system where mental phenomena and biochemical events take place in the same field, it is much easier to account for how ways of thinking affect the body. If one idea is central to yoga psychology, it is that thoughts are real and have real tangible consequences, as we saw in the discussion of karma. Sankhya describes thoughts as packets of potential energy which grow more and more solid when favorable conditions are present and obstacles are removed. They become desires, then habits, then ways of living with physical consequences. Those consequences may look no more like thoughts than an oak tree looks like an acorn, but the Gita says they are just as intimately related. Just as a seed can grow into only one kind of tree, thoughts can produce effects only of the same nature. Kindness to others, to take just one example, favors a nervous system that is kind to itself. The forces of evolution. Sankhya describes Prakriti as a field of forces called gunas, a concept that gets a good deal of attention in the Gita. According to Sankhya, the evolution of primordial Prakriti into mind and matter begins when the equilibrium of Prakriti is disturbed. In Hindu myth, this is the dawn of the day of Brahma, a period of explosive expansion not unlike the Big Bang of modern cosmology. At this instant of creation, thrown into imbalance, Prakriti differentiates itself into three basic states or qualities of primordial energy. These are the gunas. Every state of matter and mind is a combination of these three: tamas, inertia; rajas, activity; and sattva, harmony or equilibrium. These are only rough translations, for the gunas have no equivalent in any other philosophy I know. The gunas can be illustrated by comparison with the three states of matter in classic physics: solid, liquid, and gas. Tamas is frozen energy, the resistance of inertia. A block of ice has a good deal of energy in the chemical bonds that hold it together, but the energy is locked in, bound up, rigid. When the ice melts, some of the energy is released as the water flows. Rajas, activity, is like a swollen river, full of uncontrolled power. And sattva, harmony, can be compared with steam when its power is harnessed. These are very precise parallels, but they convey an important point about the gunas. All three are states of energy, and each can be converted into the others. Guna means strand, and in the Gita, the gunas are described as the very fabric of existence, the veil that hides unity and covering its of diversity. Tamas is Maya's power of concealment, the darkness or ignorance that hides unitive reality. Rajas distracts and scatters awareness, turning it away from reality toward the diversity of the outside world. Thus, the gunas are essentially born of the mind. When the mind's activity is stilled, we see life as it is. We can also think of the gunas as different levels of consciousness. Tamas, the lowest level, is the vast unconscious, a chaotic dumping ground for the residue of past middle states. Unconscious is the sense, in this sense, has something in common with Jung's collective unconscious, in that it is the repository not only of past experiences, but also of our evolutionary heritage and basic drives of the human being's animal past. This record is shared, of course, by all human beings, and at its deepest levels, the unconscious is universal. There is no choice in tamas, no awareness. This is complete ignorance of the unity of life, ignorance of any other need than one's own basic urges. Rajas is what we ordinarily mean by mind, the incessant stream of thought that races along, desiring, worrying, resenting, scheming, competing, frustrating, and getting frustrated. Rajas is power released, but uncontrolled and egocentric. Sattva, finally, is the so-called higher mind, detached, unruffled, self-controlled. This is not a state of repressive regulation, but the natural harmony that comes with unity of purpose, character, and desire. Negative states of mind do still come up, prompted by tamas and rajas, but there is no need to act on them. According to Sankhya, everything in the world of mind and matter is an expression of all three gunas, with one guna always predominant. This becomes particularly interesting in describing personality as a field of forces. The Rajasic person is full of energy. The Tamasic person is sluggish, indifferent, insensitive. The Sattvic person, calm, resourceful, compassionate, and selfless. Yet all three are always present at some level of awareness, and their proportions change. Their interplay is the dynamics of personality. The same individual will have times when he is bursting with energy and times when inertia descends and paralyzes his will. Times when he is thoughtful and other times when he is moving so fast that he never notices those around him. The person is the same. He is simply experiencing the play of the gunas. As long as he identifies with his body and mind, he is at the mercy of this play. But the self is not involved in the gunas' interaction. It is witness rather than participant. Without senses itself, it shines through the functioning of the senses. Completely independent, it supports all things. Beyond the gunas, it enjoys their play. The gunas form the basis of the most compassionate account of human nature I have come across in any philosophy or psychology, East or West. They not only explain differences in character, they describe the basic forces of personality and allow the possibility of reshaping ourselves after a higher ideal. Because personality is a process, the human being is constantly remaking himself or herself. Left to itself, the mind goes on repeating the same old habitual patterns of personality. By training the mind, however, anyone can learn to step in and change old ways of thinking. That is the central principle of yoga. Reshape yourself through the power of your will. Never let yourself be degraded by self-will. The will is the only friend of the self, and the will is the only enemy of the self. The Gita speaks of this kind of growth as part of spiritual evolution. In its natural state, consciousness is a continuous flow of awareness. But through the distorting action of the gunas, we have fallen from this native state into fragmented, sometimes stagnant awareness. Seeing through a divided mind, we see life divided wherever we look. Separate selves, antagonistic interests, conflicts within ourselves. Evolution, according to the Gita, is a painfully slow return to our native state. First, tamas must be transformed into rajas, apathy and insensitiveness into energetic, enthusiastic activity. But the energy of the rajas is self-centered and dispersed. It must be harnessed to a higher ideal by the will. Then it becomes sattva when all this passionate energy is channeled into selfless action. This state is marked by happiness, a calm mind, abundant vitality, and the concentration of genius. But even this is not the end. The goal of evolution is to return to unity. That is, to still the mind. Then the soul rests in pure unitary consciousness, which is the state of permanent joy. In the still mind, the depths of meditation, the self reveals itself. Beholding the self by means of the self, an aspirant knows the joy and peace of complete fulfillment. But yeah, we'll go ahead and end on that piece. Yeah. Some more of the many philosophies of Hinduism and how things are seen. Now, there's a lot of pieces to go through because remember, this is only one book of Hinduism. It's like reading only Leviticus, which some idiots tend to do. They're like, yeah, it likes us to hate on gays. Yeah. Sleeping, being gay, will kill you. Don't worry about all the shellfish and the mixed blends of fabric. But it's kind of like that, an idiot only reading one book of the Bible. So yeah, the Bhagavad Gita in and of itself is just one book of Hinduism. As we discussed before, there are 4 earlier scripts, and then there's a number of other parts that are written down. But the four earliest, I can't remember what they were called. But yeah, we read those in last episode, talking about how they're part of a greater story in what forms the ideology of Hinduism. And remember, all the Hindu gods are kind of a version of the same god. They're just different aspects. From what I understood. I may be wrong on that. You know. I'm not a Hindu, or yeah. So we're kind of learning about this at the same time. But we should have one more episode of introduction and then get into the actual book, because that put us on page 48 of 61, so that leaves us about 12, 13 more pages, which we'll finish with the next episode and then get into the actual Gita in and of itself. But yeah. It good, excuse me, I'm exhausted. I need to get some sleep. Got a doctor's appointment and everything, but yeah. Anyway, we'll be reading what is written here. It does have some actual ode pieces from the Gita itself, though a lot of it is talking about the author, who is a scholar in this kind of stuff, talks about what the chapters mention. Trying to see. Oh, wait. I thought it would be next episode we'd finish the introduction, but I'm wrong. It's 67 pages, not 61. I was thinking 61 instead of 67, but yeah. So we still have a good possibility of finishing it next episode. It'll be a long one. Yeah. Notes. Just looking at how many chapters. The book itself looks to be, or the Gita itself looks to be 18 chapters. Chapter 9. Oh, okay. So they have a part, they had chapter 9, The Royal Path, which is written by is a written description of what happens, and then they have chapter 9, the royal path, giving you an example here, which is the actual lines in the Gita. So it's like double chapters. So, okay. Getting an idea of what it has. But hopefully we finish the introduction next episode, and thus will begin the Gita itself in the episode after that. Introduced and translated Eknath Eswaran. So yeah, he does a introduction of an introduction chapter of each chapter, because it's like, this is what happens, what is dealt with, and then you get the actual chapter of the Gita itself. Okay, so that's what we've got looking ahead. Anyway, as always, educate thyself. Think, read, study, learn. Someone tells you something you have trouble believing, ask them to cite their sources. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you all in the next one. Until then, later.